Hello, Gerry. How are you?
Hi, how are you, Jen?
I am wonderful. I've been having a good day, but my day is even brighter now that you and I are having this conversation
Oh, I
because
am so happy to have this conversation.
it is launch day of your book. We are here.
Yay, it is here. We have arrived. And in our working together, I feel like this has gotten here in no time.
It's so interesting when I feel like people kind of land on both sides of that, where if their book hasn't come out in 6 months, they think it's taking too long. And other people, if it's been a decade in the making, it's fast. So it's always interesting to kind of see where people kind of land on that. But, for you, right before we went live, we were saying that we started working together 2 years ago, spring 2 years ago. And
Yeah.
now went from, if I'm not mistaken, I don't think you had it anything like really actually concretely written when we started 2 years ago. Is that accurate?
Not a word, not one word. I came to you with, I realized I have to write a book. How do you write a book?
Yeah.
that was I have zero on paper. How do you do this? So I felt like, one of the things I've had this conversation with a couple of friends of mine in writing this book, which is, the Thriving Mindset Tools for Empowerment in a Disruptive World. One of the things I talk about in the book is the power of beginner's mind. And I've had the opportunity to approach this entire book writing process from true beginner's mind because I really didn't know how to do this. I am not from a writing background. I'm actually from a technical background. And so I got to exercise beginner's mind.
How cool is that you're kind of walking your talk from right within the confines of your book?
Yeah, and one of the wonderful things about this process is I've met a lot of authors, including you, along the way, and I've discovered some of the things that they've advised me about was the fact that coming to a process like this, and if it's writing a book or I think many other things, there are certain burdens that you take off yourself if you can come into the process with beginner's mind.
Oh, well, now I need to know more. So
yeah.
What would be an example of that?
Well, I had a really interesting talk with a friend of mine's. Actually, it's not just with her, with a group that she runs, which is an authors group. And I came to speak to the group about my process of writing the book. And I quickly realized before I started speaking that I was the only one in the group who had almost no background in writing. I don't have a degree in literature or English. Some of them had master's degrees in English.
Yeah.
And I went through a moment of panic before I started speaking when I thought, oh my goodness, what do I have to say to this group? Everybody here is much more experienced in this venue than I am. But what I realized I had to talk to them about was my process, which was remarkably different because for me, it's just a journey of exploration. And I think the more that we can approach challenges or difficult situations as a journey of exploration, the better off we are. And let's face it, we're in a difficult moment right now. It's an interesting day to be launching the book because, as you and I were talking about a little while ago, with the pandemic, I am launching a book on thriving through disruption while we're experiencing one of the biggest disruptions in a century. And so the book is not about COVID. But one of the things I did, like towards the end of the book, as we were at the end of writing the book, as we were realizing I'm going to be launching during a pandemic, was doing some hard thinking about whether the tools I'm putting forth in the book are actually equal to the moment. Yeah. And what I realized was, although this is not a book about COVID in any way, the things that I talk about in the book are very relevant to this moment of thriving through this type of disruption. Yeah. And part of that, the approach of thriving through disruption is looking at what you're going through also as a journey of learning and exploration, even when it's a really difficult and terrible thing as this particular pandemic is.
Yeah. It's so interesting because we were saying, we started working on this 2 years ago, and obviously 2 years ago, the pandemic was not a thing. And so it's been interesting to kind of see how relevant your book was pre-pandemic, and now how even more relevant it might be while we're in a pandemic, and then even post-pandemic. So, did your book, I know the answers to this, but, just for the sake of those who are watching, did your book have to, everybody's throwing around the word pivot, have to pivot this, pivot that all throughout the last year, to what degree did your book have to do any pivoting during this last year?
Yeah, it is a great question. And I had some conversations with you guys and some conversations with Bailey, who was so helpful through this entire process about, pivoting, particularly when I learned that I'd be launching during a pandemic. And I decided not to pivot at all. The only thing I did that could be considered a teeny tiny pivot was I wrote a 1.5-page letter to the reader that's in the front of the book that talks about the rest of the book within the context of COVID. And I did not change a single word in the rest of the book, because what I determined was thriving through disruption is thriving through disruption. And so what I had written, and I felt strongly that the lessons I was giving, like 11 lessons in particular, were relevant during the pre-pandemic, during pandemic, and post-pandemic, as they were when I conceived them. So it did not need to pivot at all. And one of the things I thought about, which I continue to think about, we're going to be, we're talking about, with the vaccine, like we now have a light at the end of the tunnel. We hope, fingers crossed, that everybody can do what they need to do and we don't end up with a resistant variant on the virus. So we're all hoping for the best here. And if that goes well as it can possibly go, we're going to emerge into a different world than we left pre-pandemic.
Yeah.
And there's going to be disruption and change. I mean, a lot of people are already experiencing it. This is, as with many things, the impact of this pandemic is very uneven. It's very lopsided. Certain parts of the population are suffering dramatically. Other parts are managing to get through relatively unscathed. That's always the case with disruption, which is a really unfortunate thing. It actually widens inequality. But one of the things I think about in the book is, what are the things, in addition to correcting the social inequities and social injustices that we need to address, in addition to that, which is different than my topic area, what are the things that we individually can do to put ourselves in the best position to survive and thrive during disruption? And I think that those things that we need to put into place, the mindset, the day-to-day practices, have proven to be very much the same during COVID as they were before COVID and as they will be post-COVID.
Yeah, I feel like that makes so much sense. And so, what was the original origin for what was the compelling reason that you came to the conclusion that putting your thought leadership into a book was the best decision for you and your business?
The book is a compendium, a compilation's better word, a compilation of what I feel like is a life journey for me. So you and I've talked about this a little bit, although I'm not sure we've talked about it that deeply. I come from, if you read my bio, I come from a nearly 30-year corporate career. I now run my own executive coaching and public speaking business. I work with entrepreneurs and corporate leaders, and really what I do, I'm the coach who helps people thrive through some type of disruption. It might be a business downturn, it might be a new competitor entering, it might be something going on that you did not expect, maybe stepping up to a new level. But the business I lead, what my bio says, is actually a very unlikely journey from the world I was born into. I was actually born into a really poor neighborhood in New York City back in the 60s and 70s, when that was not it was not such a glamorous place to be. I was born to a single mother. We actually struggled tremendously, although my mother worked incredibly hard, perhaps the hardest working person I've ever known. 12, 14, 16-hour days were just the norm for her. there were times when we didn't have enough money to pay for heat and electricity. So we, just to not go hungry, we had to let the lights get shut off. And so that is a very unlikely place to start, to be in the place that I am now. The data, which I quote in the book, says that an African American man born into the circumstances I was is perhaps like 6% likely to have the life outcome that I have had.
Yeah.
And what I've learned through this journey is that the mindset, the skills, the practices that it took to succeed in my early life and to overcome those odds were the same things that I needed in the early days of my corporate career, as an African American man going into the corporate world, as a gay man making his way in the corporate world once again at a time in the 80s, long before things were quite as accepting as they are now. Not that they're perfect now, but they were much worse back then. This thriving mindset was what I needed then. When I started leading teams, I realized that these practices were things that I could teach other people and instill in the people who worked for me. When I then pivoted and started my coaching practice, I've come to realize that this is what I work with people on, the thriving through some type of disruption. So it was only natural to now put this all together into a book. And so the book is really what I've experienced, what I've learned from that experience, and the conversations I've had with clients, again and again and again, are now there in a book.
Yeah. And while you were writing it and deciding what of your personal story to include or to not include, as you were doing that, or even now, because it's launch day, like we are in the throes of launch day at this very moment. Yeah. Again, I love this part of the process. But do you have any hesitancy, or did you have any hesitancy thinking through, wow, I'm sharing a lot of information about my past in this book? And did you have to confront any of those, demons that people kind of end up having to confront while deciding how much of their personal story are they going to share or not share? Especially because your book there's such a research element to it. Like, it's very clear that the subject so intimately and so deeply. So it's not just kind of anecdotal things. It's very, there's a lot of kind of data points that you've included in here. So
yeah.
Did you struggle with that at all? I guess is the crux of my question.
Yeah, I did struggle with it. So, you mentioned there's a lot of data in the book, and I have kind of a lot of data points in the beginning of the book, which some friends have read the very beginning of the book and said, given the topic, I was surprised that it was as data rich as it is. And it's just like having a conversation with you. And I felt I've kind of ping-ponged in this book by presenting, a lot of research I did, which is very me. I don't believe in saying things without the support of research. I think that's very, very important, to be grounded in reality, to be grounded in fact, to have a certain dexterity and command of fact before you say something. And also going over onto the much more personal side. I mean, there's certain stories I share in this book that I have never shared before personally. And it was challenging. It was there, I'm sitting now in my office, as we all have been during COVID. I spent a lot of time in this room laboring over, do I want to tell that story? Like, wow, do I really want to put that story down in writing? And, there are some stories that got cut from the book, but most of the deeply personal stories actually stayed. Yeah. Because what I've realized is the power in what we learn, it is about those personal stories. And this is not a book that is solely about triumph. What some of these personal stories that are in the book are actually stories about failure, about times when I did not make the best decisions, or times when I've known companies that did not make the best decisions. But that's important. So the failures, in fact, one of the chapters in this book is called Thriving Through Failure. And it's a little bit of a play on words, because I don't mean, and as I say in the chapter, I don't mean just succeeding in spite of failure. I mean using failure as a tool to thrive. So how do we actually experience failure and then benefit from our failures as a tool for thriving? And if you're going to do that, then you have to like look at those difficult stories head on and be willing to say them. So that's what I tried to do in the book.
Yeah. And you know what I love so much about what you're saying is that there's so many memes and quotes out there about, you know, how what failure can teach us, and, you know, everyone fails, and just all like very, very much like platitudes. While to some degree you can read them and you're like, okay, yeah, I get that. But what I love so much of what you've done is that you've actually kind of dissected those things apart and really written about them in such a rich way that it almost gives people more permission. This is my interpretation anyway, gives people more permission to fail, because you're showing a path of how you can use that failure in this kind of thriving mindset. Whereas it's just like, hey, you know, if you don't succeed the first time, try again. Like there's all those kind of things, but I like that you've like really put it in a framework that can actually help make people feel empowered, rather than I failed and now I have to try to pick myself back up and try again.
Yeah, I think, thank you for saying that, because I will say I tried hard to have like no memes in the book, like no like quick catchphrases like that, because I don't, well-intentioned as they are, I don't know that we get as much value out of quick statements like that as we can. So yeah, my book is intended as a hands-on guide. So what I wanted to do was to go kind of deeply into these stories of when things maybe did not go as we had hoped they would go, or as I had hoped they would go, and to look at how you feel when these things happen, to look at some of the cycles that people can get into when these things happen. One of the things I talk about very early on in the book is something I call the adversity fear paralysis cycle. And it's kind of a framework that I look at throughout the book. And what I mean by that cycle is that, you know, disruption and adversity are just a normal part of life. And our response to adversity or disruption is always fear. And it's the fear that we're not going to be able to overcome whatever the circumstances of the disruption may be. And the problem is not the fear itself, but the problem is when that fear leads to a kind of paralysis, which is an inability to respond productively to whatever the disruption may be. And the problem with paralysis is that it always leads to more disruption. Either the initial gets worse, or a new adversity arises. Yeah. And the point of the book is to recognize there's nothing wrong with being afraid. I actually don't. I don't believe that fearlessness exists, or I don't know that it believes it exists in sane people. I think that to not be afraid is not, you know, if you're not afraid, you're not paying attention. And certainly with some of the things we see going on around us right now. But the key is what you do when you're afraid, and you can learn to look at that place of fear that we always find ourselves in as also a signal that you're standing in front of an opportunity. And you can learn to use that fear as kind of a springboard to leapfrog out of whatever that adversity or disruption that you're facing and into an opportunity that I think is always on the flip side of disruption. So, you know, if I could take that that framework and apply it to, you know, what we're going through with COVID right now. So we've got a lot of reason to be afraid. And really, if you're not afraid of COVID, then you're not paying attention. So there's very good reason to be fearful. But the question is, like, what do you do? So do you give in one way of the paralysis, you know, people who refuse to wear masks? I mean, come on. So, or can you take the fear of everything we're experiencing right now and realize that, you know what, this is just a signal that there's been lots of stuff going on in society that we need to look at.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of problems that COVID is laying bare about inequality, problems in our healthcare system, problems in our economic system, problems with business that we really need to face up to. And can we use this as a moment to springboard into new opportunity and to start having some of the conversations that we need to have? And that's a notion of what I call a courageous leap. And basically, this entire book is about how do we set ourselves up such that at these times of disruption and fear, we maximize our ability to take those courageous leaps and not get stuck in the place of paralysis.
I feel like you've just said so many awesome things. I feel like my takeaway of what you're saying is that there's so many tools, which is why I love that your subtitle is Tools for Empowerment in a Disruptive World. So yeah, so we don't have to just kind of sit back and be like, all right, like adversity's hitting me. I'm just gonna, lay and just let it take me over, take me down. Whereas this whole book is really around like, what are those tools to really just find yourself in a more empowered position? And I love that so much. And I know that, I remember when we first started working together 2 years ago in our group academy setting, where we were just brainstorming like what the title of this book would be. And I know that resilience came up so many different times. Adversity kept coming up. Like there was all of these really awesome words that so many people find themselves facing. And so I love it. I am so happy with how everything has kind of organically evolved. And I love that it's the thriving mindset. And then the cover of your book with is just so perfect. I'll see if I can potentially try to figure out how to share your cover while we're talking.
Oh, I would love that. Please share my cover. And I'll say that, yeah, I mean, there was a lot of work in thinking about the title, and that word tools was something we settled on. And my approach in writing this book was that it should be a hands-on guide. Like this should be something that you keep on your desk, that you can reference the chapters when you're going through things. Something else that I ended up putting into the book, which has turned out to be a really important part of the book. Oh, there it is. Thank you.
There it is
an assessment. So once I had the tools for thriving, which I boiled down in the book into 11 dimensions of a thriving mindset. I think there are 11 things that we always need to keep in mind for us to be able to thrive through disruptive times. And that, we're going to be, one of the things I talk about in the book is that we can think about disruption as waves that hit us. And sometimes we're being hit by more than one wave of disruption at a time. Certainly many of us in COVID could speak to the reality of that right now. One of the things that is in the book is what I call a thriving mindset assessment. So it is a questionnaire of really simple questions that you rate yourself on. And what the questionnaire gives you at the end, when you score it, is where you are with relation to each of the 11 dimensions of the thriving mindset that I talk about in the book. So the assessment guides you to which parts of this thriving mindset are most important for you. And it's built, part of the principle of what I believe, of what I've learned about myself and what I've seen in others, is that we can all grow. We can all grow. I believe that fundamentally, that you can develop yourself with any talent if you want to. If you're committed, if you're willing to put in the work, you can. And so that is the principle that the book is built with. Yeah. And the point of the assessment is for you to step back and start to look at where are the areas that I'm really strong, and then where are the areas that I might have the opportunity to shore up a little bit, and then literally page to the book to the point that's most relevant for you, so that you can shore yourself up. That said, I recommend that people read the entire book in order, because the capabilities kind of build on each other. But my point to your point of making this like a very hands-on tools kind of thing Let's do an assessment. Let's be able to assess ourselves. And the assessment is free with the book. It's actually in the appendix, and in the book there's a URL where you can actually download an interactive version of the assessment. So you click and do it online, and then it spits out what you need to look at, and what are the most important areas for you. So it's been I'm a practical kind of guy. I believe that it's a matter of getting down to business, focusing on what's important for you, and so I constructed the book with that in mind.
Yeah, which I love that you took it into such a multidimensional type of approach, because, just having that ability to take an assessment, because I think we're in a society or in a culture of people who love taking assessments. But I love that your assessment actually drives the usage of your book. And to me, that is a kind of one level above, because a lot of times someone might have a book, they might have an assessment, but you were so intentional in the configuration of how those two meet and intersect with one another that I think it's super, super valuable. And so I do have your website up on the screen. So that way, if anyone, because we're in the middle of the book launch today, super excited.
Yes.
However, if they want to download, we would love if you went to, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere you want to buy your book, to purchase the book. But you do have your chapter 1 beautifully laid out, chapter 1. Of course, I'm biased here. That they can access from your website, and then that can kind of just give a little bit of a taste of what your book is about. Although I think this conversation has been a very good kind of entry point into what the book is about and how it can actually impact someone's life.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for putting the website up. So yes, you can go to my website, gerryvalentine.com. You'll see on the website, you can navigate to the book page. The book is up on the website, and then you can link directly to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, bookshop.org, wherever you prefer to purchase the book directly from my website. So I would love that if you go there. And as Jen has just said, the first chapter of the book is available for free download on my website. And to the point of wanting things to be tools and very practical, I wrote the first chapter as a summary of the entire book. Yeah. So if you download the first chapter, you'll get a great sense of everything I cover in the book. In fact, the first chapter lays out why the thriving mindset is so important in today's world. And I talk about all of the changes we're faced in today's world. What's the pace of change, and what does that actually mean, and why the thriving mindset intersects with this pace of change. And then the first chapter ends with a quick summary of all the other chapters in the book. So when you're done with the first chapter, you know what this book is about, and then you can make your decisions about whether this is for you, and hopefully go purchase the rest of the book. And then once you purchase the book, you get access to the assessment, and you're ready to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love so much I love a good assessment. I really do. And I love that your assessment is such a practical thing for people, because I think a lot of times books come out and they're very theory driven or they're story driven, both of which are fantastic. But in this case, yours is just it really is the tools for empowerment. And that
and if I can tell you, do you know how I came to that assessment, the questions in the assessment, and why it feels so practical? So the assessment is really a compilation of questions that I've been asking my clients for the last 10 years.
Yep.
So literally it was, okay, what are the questions that you ask your clients again and again and again that you've asked literally hundreds of people for the last 10 years? Okay, write those down and now figure out what the answers to those questions mean. And then boom, here it is. So the process was bringing together a very practical process that I've done for a long time, and getting in a way that multiple people could use it, which is, it kind of takes us back to your point of why write this book? It really was, it's turned into, it's a summary of my journey, and then what I've learned through that journey, I can teach other people, and of what I do with my clients day in and day out. That's the book. That was the reason for writing the book, which, to me, again, I never envisioned myself as a writer. I never imagined that I'd be at today launching a book. If you'd asked me 10 years ago, I would have said, oh, no, I'll never do that. Here I am. And the way I got there was, for me, the book is a very practical process. It's like, how do you bring these lessons forward? This is it.
Yeah. I am so happy it's launch day, and I'm just so grateful that we've been on this journey together. And again, for, just around 2 years, which is it's inspiring, because there's so many people that I think have their book in them, but they don't necessarily know how to get it out. Or if it does get out, it takes way more time than 2 years does to go from no words written on paper to holding that book in your hand, which is, it's just, I don't know. I feel like sometimes I'm a loss for words, no matter how many times I have conversations like this. But I feel like yours in particular is such a beautiful example of the harmony that all of the different things that you're doing in your business, your speaking, the writing, the assessment, it's just a really solid example of how to do this all really, really well. And I think yours is going to be a model that I use going forward.
Yeah, thank you. And actually, I mean, I don't want this to end without saying a few words about Publisher Purpose Press, because you guys are amazing. I wrote a book announcement email blast early this morning, and part of what I said in there was, it takes a village. You really need the right people who are to help you through these processes. And in fact, one of the chapters in the book is about surrounding yourself with the people who lift you up, and who in turn you also lift up, which is the people we choose to surround ourselves with, is very important if we want to thrive through disruptive times. Very, very important. And some of the people that I'm very grateful that I chose to surround myself with is the group at Publisher Purpose Press, because you mentioned I didn't know how to write a book. I really didn't. And we started together 2 years ago with me asking you literally, how do you write a book? I think I want to do this. How do you do this? Yeah. And it's very, 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 very important that, in many areas of your life, but your publisher, it performs an incredibly important role during this process. And it is a multi-dimensional role. So there is the notion of helping you through the mechanics of what writing a book is, helping you through the editorial process of what writing a book is. And, something I will confess that surprised me is also the emotional part of what writing a book is, because there is this concept of putting yourself out there and oh my goodness, do I have anything to say? And who's going to want to listen to me? That you need the right people lifting you up, such that you can get through. And I would speculate, this is the only time I've ever tried to write a book, but I would speculate that one of the reasons people may spend a decade or decades struggling to write a book is that you may not have surrounded yourself with the right people.
Yeah.
I think that's, if you've been struggling for a long time, I think you might want to look at that, because it's important through a process that is as challenging as this is.
Yeah, I say all the time that publishing is a team sport. I think a lot of people assume that, you're writing your book, you're isolating yourself in a cave somewhere. And that's not really how it should work. You shouldn't have to isolate yourself and struggle, and it doesn't have to be a struggle. And there's plenty of parts in the process that do have some, they're not easy always, but it shouldn't be a struggle just because you don't have the right resources or team around you.
Right. And if you're struggling in isolation to write a book, I mean, that's a problem. So yeah, it is. I don't know any way that this can happen that it's not hard. I mean, I am not going to I don't want to lead anybody to believe that writing a book is easy. Writing a book is hard. But there's a difference between hard and unending struggle. There's hard, working out in the gym can be hard, but there's progress from it. Yeah. If you are struggling and you're not having any progress, then I think there's something to look. There's something to look at.
Yeah, that's a great PSA. It's just it because there is a difference and there's a delineation to what you're saying. And I think it's very important to think through. So thank you for saying those very kind words. It's been an absolute joy working with you. And now you're part of the PYP family. So you're stuck with us for life. So that's how we operate anyway.
Which will be handy when the next book comes around, won't it?
Sure will. It sure will.
The thought has already occurred to me. So I cannot believe it. But yeah, the thought has already occurred. Like, maybe there should be another one.
And I'm sure at the beginning of this process together 2 years ago, I probably said something to the effect of, once you get bit with the first book, you'll want to write another one. And you were probably like, never. And
never. I'll be lucky if I get through the first one. And, that was another thing. I was terrified through this process. Like, oh my God, maybe I don't have that much to say. Maybe this isn't going to be a book. This will be like a pamphlet. This will be just like a stapled pamphlet. And, then I didn't tell you this story. So when you guys sent me the proof for the book, because I've never written a book before, I didn't completely realize, although I guess I should have, that a proof for a book is a bound book.
Sure.
Like it's a bound book. Somewhere in my mind, I expected these are going to be like flats of paper with a binder clip on them. And so the envelope arrived. Like, hey, that's a little small. I thought, and then I opened. It's like, it's a book. Like, there's a certain power in it when it catches you by surprise. Yeah. When you really you didn't for some reason process the fact that the proof is going to be a bound book.
Yeah.
And then you're holding in your hand, and then I'm holding it in my hand. I'm realizing this is substantial. Like, this is actually like kind of thick. This is like thicker than a lot of the books by very well known authors that are sitting on my bookshelf. Like, it's not crazy thick, but this is a substantial thing. And so it's not a pamphlet. It's actually a real book. And I was like, wow, this is great. Here it is.
And I love those aha moments or epiphany moments, or like, shit, like I did this thing. Like I really did this thing. And to me, it's really at this phase of the process that we're talking about, where you get it for the first time in your hand and you're like, all of the blood, the sweat, the tears, the pining, all of the emotions are
I don't even remember it.
In your hand. Like,
and I don't even remember the hard part now. All I remember is, I have a book.
Yep.
Like I literally have, like, it's all like, that's all been flushed from my memory.
Yeah. That's how our minds work. Yep.
Yeah, that's all gone. All I'm thinking about is, I got a book. Now I'm going to market a book. Here, my book. I have completely forgotten like all the hours in this room, and when I was confused and like, what I'm going to do here, and how do you do that, and oh my God, this isn't enough to say here, and this isn't long enough. Actually, I cut quite a bit, and it's still a pretty big book. Yeah.
It's sturdy and it's amazing. And I'm so happy that we are having this conversation, because while yes, 2 years, it's still been, it's been a road, it's been a journey to get.
It's been a journey. What I sent it to some friends and said, here's what I did with my COVID vacation. I sat at home and I wrote a book.
Yeah. This has been such a great conversation, Gerry. I'm so appreciative of you and all the wisdom that you're sharing with the world by putting this out there. And so just once again, if you can just share with people how they can find you. I have your website along the bottom of the screen, but any other ways, just a quick plug for however makes sense.
Absolutely. So absolutely go to my website, GerryValentine.com. That's Gerry with a G, Gerry Valentine.com. The book is there. You can find me on Twitter at Gerry Val. You can find me on LinkedIn, which is Twitter and LinkedIn are my primary social media. So you can find me as Gerry Valentine on LinkedIn. If you reach out to me, I will accept your connection. And I would love to stay in touch. And when you go to my website, you can, as I said, you can download the first chapter of the book. It is free. You can join my email list when you download, which means we will stay in touch. And the first chapter of the book summarizes everything in the book. So download that like that. You'll know what's all that's in the book, and you can decide if the book is for you. GerryValentine.com.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Gerry. It has been fabulous having this conversation, and we will obviously continue to stay in touch.
We will be in touch, and thank you and Bailey and everybody at PYP for everything. You've been amazing. I could not have asked for better.
Oh, you're so welcome.